Welcome to the War in Heaven. I am Austin Hepworth. I'm here along with Michael Hepworth, and we look forward to talking with you today. We are going to be discussing doubt. It's one of the things that tends to come up in religion um, that can certainly maybe put a wrench in things, you could say, for some people, or cause them to look elsewhere. People sometimes will lose their faith in religion or in God over different doubts that they have or things that they see. And so we thought it'd be appropriate to discuss doubt in the context of the war in heaven, doubt in the context of agency, and doubt in the context of what we might be able to do um, if it's something that we experience to help us work through that. So, kind of high level, big picture, war in heaven. Again, it's important to remember that God gave us agency and He had this plan for us to be able to experience things, choose things for ourselves. And one of the things that this journey here on earth gives us is the ability to choose whether we want life or death. And we're talking about an internal perspective. What is it that we're choosing? And if we choose life, then it has to be an actual choice. And this brings us to an interesting place of we still experience this in the world today. There's this massive debate over whether there's truth, whether there's absolute truth, whether it can be found. And people have very differing levels of experience on this. Some people profess to have their truth versus someone else's truth. Some say there's no absolute truth. Some say there is. And the thing that I believe the whole question on truth and doubt comes to, it boils down to a very interesting proposition of what is it that you believe, or even maybe a little deeper, what is it you want? And this is a fascinating place to be on a way to discuss truth and whether truth can be identified or pursued if it is based on um, what you believe or what you want. And so we wanted to dive into that a little bit today to discuss more about the concept and why we feel that our doubts and truths can be reflections of what it is that we believe or want in life. So Michael, just wanted to maybe kick it to you to explain some of your thoughts on what our doubts show us about what we believe or what we want in our lives.
Yeah, what you just said reminded me of a quote from a book by Brandon Mull, The Five Kingdoms. He says, and I think I've shared this at a podcast before, but he says that the purpose of existence is the education of the will, and the meaning of life is to learn to love the right things. And so when you said it comes down to what we want, what we desire, I think it's easy to take it at a superficial level and say, well, if belief and truth just matter to what I want, then I can believe whatever I want. And to a large extent, that's true. That's kind of what people do. They believe according to what they want the world to be. But if the purpose of life, the meaning of life, is to learn to love the right things, then you learn to desire truth as it is. Not, you don't want things to be a certain way because you want them that way. You want to find truth, and your desire to find it is what propels you to believe in certain ways. So if you believe that the world is intelligible and understandable, that stems from a desire to understand it, understand the world around you, and that can lead you to um, learning things about the physical world. So it all stems from our desires. And if you take it from a religious perspective, sometimes people will say, I doubt that God exists, or I don't believe these certain things in the scriptures, or I don't believe that these kinds of miracles could happen. And when there's a doubt about something, there's a correlative belief about something else. If you doubt that some one thing exists, then you're believing that something else does exist or is a certain way. So every doubt is correlated with a belief in something else. And if those beliefs are associated with our desires, then we can just follow that train back to I doubt this, therefore, what is it that I desire? desiring something and it isn't correlated with whatever the thing is that I doubt. And so many times in religion, we focus on our doubts. We've maybe grown up learning about God, and we heard something that made us doubt the way we believed. And I think a helpful question to ask when we have those doubts is, what is it that we desire? What is it that we now believe in because we've doubted this other thing? Too often, I think the focus is just on the doubt. I doubt that this is that way. And then that leads to a lot of negativity. But if it's, what is it that I desire? And then if you find out that what you desire isn't what you intended, maybe that leads you down a different path. But doubt can lead to a lot of negativity, a lot of frustration and anger. But I think it's helpful to understand that doubts, as you talked about, stem from desires, they stem from belief in something. So it's, I think, helpful to identify what those desires are, what those beliefs might be.
Yeah, the Bible has a very interesting statement in it, and I believe it's both a promise and a curse, or a warning, or however you want to frame it. But the statement says, "Seek and ye shall find." And in my experience in religion and churches, people tend to believe that's just talking about good things. But to me, it's a warning as well, saying what you seek after, you will find. You'll find support for, you'll find evidence of, maybe it will come into your life, whatever it is you're seeking, you'll find it. And that may not mean, if you want $1 billion, you may not get $1 billion exactly, but you'll find riches, or you'll find temptations that come with money, or different things. But to me, the deeper principle of this, in the search for truth and in facing our doubts and understanding our doubts, is that we only find what we're seeking for. Then there's another scripture that says, "For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also." And where our heart is the things that we desire, the things that we want. So if I want to retire and stop working, that prevailing belief or that desire could become something that starts to shape, again, what I'm seeking, what I'm looking for, what I start to process, what opportunities I take. Are they going to lead to something that leads to retirement or not? And my world starts to become defined by the thing that I desired. And so I think, to your point, Michael, that when we have a doubt come in, we can recognize that this belief we used to have is now being challenged by another belief that's growing inside of us. And we have to look at and understand, is my heart still pure? Because it's possible that we believe something wrong in the first instance, and that this new belief that's forming is because our heart changed and became more pure and appropriately aligned with truth. But it could be too that we're doing the opposite, and we're starting to pursue things that aren't necessarily good for us or aren't correct for us. And again, going back to the choice side of life, in our world today, we try so hard. We just believe that if we just put a fact in front of somebody, it'll present them with the truth and they'll be convinced of it. And we go to task often to say, look at these facts, look at these facts, look what science says. And yet we're crazy split in our world on beliefs. Religions are still very split. In my religion, there's a story of golden plates and scripture that came translated from these golden plates. Now, whether or not those existed, people argue till they're blue in the face they did and they didn't, and different things. But in reality, we simply have nothing you can't say nothing. We don't have the gold plates themselves in the physical world to show. We have some witnesses that saw them. And so some people rely on witness statements, some won't accept that. But these are, again, pieces that when we go through religion, the Bible itself, the only way to know the Bible is true is to read it. Truth, one of the interesting things about truth is that it has to appeal to itself at some point or reference itself at some point to prove it's true. You can't prove the Bible true through all the things outside the Bible. You have to include the Bible in proving the Bible's true. I can't convince someone that I live or exist by referencing all the other billions of people that live and exist. I have to reference me. I have to show them proof of me to show that there's a truth that Austin exists. What this means is that in our pursuit of truth, the only way to fully find truth is to interact with something that is true. And in addition to interacting with it, meaning we have to experience it, engage with it, handle it, feel it, test it out type thing, we also have to have a desire to find that truth if we're going to find it. Because the things we seek are that which we'll find. The things we treasure is where our heart will be. And so if I treasure not having the truth in my life, I will probably not have the truth in my life. And that sounds a little bit wild to people. But there are many invitations for us to simply stop pursuing truth and to start to just purely believe. There were statements, a lot of statements during COVID, believe in science. And that to me was always a fascinating statement to say, wait, you want us to stop challenging? That's the whole foundation of science, is you challenge and you hypothesize and you test and you challenge and you refute and you do all these things. You now just want me to believe? How does science progress at this point? But the interesting thing is there's two interesting sides to the believe in science equation. One is science seems to be admitting you do have to still believe in it, which means there are things that aren't conclusive. It's still a belief. But there's also this, I'd say, kind of scarier notion to say, but just accept it because we said so. And some religion may feel that way to people. And so this gets us then the question of, okay, I have a doubt. Let's say I doubt whether God exists or not. Well, what do I do at that point? Do I go study all of the evidences and things of why God doesn't exist? Or in order to know that God exists, I probably have to turn to the things that claim to be from God. Because again, how can I prove that Austin exists? If someone in the world in China says, I really want to know if this Austin's a real guy or not, or is he AI? Are you going to turn to all the sources that aren't originally created by me, that aren't sourced by me, that aren't part of me, and just listen to comments on the internet back and forth about whether I exist or not? Or are you going to try and dig in and actually go to the source, try and connect to say, I have to interact with the truth itself in order to know? And this is one of the things, the fundamental things to know about God is when you have doubts about whether God exists or not, you have to ask yourself, well, what are my desires? Because if God does exist, probably means there's desires I have that I can no longer pursue. Almost all of us have desires that do not operate in accordance with God or his truths. And so some of us won't go to God directly. We won't ask him in prayer. We won't read his written word that he's given us or the word inspired by him. And we don't turn to that source. We instead go to other sources to tell us. We go to science. What does science tell us about God? Well, what can science tell you about me? Unless, again, I go to that, become part of that process. But as it stands, scientists haven't evaluated me. They haven't gone through and verified it's me. They haven't sequenced my DNA or anything. And so this notion of believe in science is still a notion that, well, we have to recognize that our beliefs come from somewhere. They're actually a choice. Our beliefs are a choice. Our desires are even a choice. The things that I desire, I want to desire. Some desires are just there. We're born with them. But other desires, all of our desires can be educated. They can be changed. They can be increased or enhanced. They can be let go of. We can lose the desire to do certain things. The desires change. And we consciously can influence and control those. And so in our search for truth, when we start doubting, to Michael's point, the first step we really need to think through is, where is my heart turning right now? I didn't have this doubt before. I have it now. Where's my heart turning? Michael, curious what your thoughts are with that and what you would suggest we ask. So if we ask the question, where's my heart turning? What is it seeking? What's the next step after that as well?
Yeah, the thought of what do we desire leads to our belief is curious, because I think in initial thought, most people would say, well, I desire to know truth. The question to ask is, if that truth leads to things that you don't like, do you really want to know it? And I think you can see that in many phases of life. You probably have met somebody or known somebody and seen it in yourself. I've seen it in myself, where I want my life or something I'm doing, I like it. I know that it's not the best for me. Maybe it's a food I really like to eat, but my desire is to eat it. And so I just kind of ignore the warning signs, the things that could be true, and I don't believe them, or I just pretend that they're not there, because I'm comfortable, I enjoy what I'm doing, or maybe change is hard. So when we talk about desires, it comes with there's that fear of, if I learn something that is uncomfortable, and I believe that's true, then that means I have to follow it. And that's a scary thought sometimes, is that we have to change our lives. And so sometimes when we believe in something and then we learn something new, we feel like there's a change that has to be made. That's kind of scary, because maybe our desires are offset. Maybe our desires are right, and this change is putting us in the right direction. But that's kind of the idea of our desires leading us to believe in certain ways. What we desire will dictate how we believe. And so when you may be on a path where you found some truth and then suddenly doubts arise, as you said, you ask yourself the question, what is it that I now desire? The first step should not be to just abandon everything you know about that track. So if I were learning mathematics, I studied mathematics in college a little bit. And if I got to the point where they were showing me multivariable calculus and I said, that's crazy, like that doesn't make any sense, do I then just question all math? Do I say all math must be false because I don't get multivariable calculus, don't understand how to integrate, how to differentiate, therefore math must be false? And it seems obvious to the point that we say, no, you just don't understand this concept. But I think we do that a lot of times when it comes to our faith and our belief. We have a doubt in a thing, we hear a thing, and we just kind of abandon a whole track, instead of saying, what is it about this thing that we don't understand? What is it about our desires that maybe don't line up with this thing? But it's too often that we just say, I have a doubt, therefore the whole structure must be wrong. And I don't think that's the pursuit that's going to lead us to the truth. We can't build a good foundation and then just abandon the whole thing because one piece doesn't seem to fit. We need to analyze that piece and figure it out. So when it comes to doubts, it can't be, I have a doubt, therefore this whole plan is wrong. It should be asking yourselves the question, what is it? Where are my desires turning? Is it, I've gotten to a point where I'm uncomfortable? And this isn't to say that your discomfort is right or wrong. Your discomfort can point you in a good direction, or your discomfort can lead you in a bad direction. You have to be able to analyze that for yourself and say, what is it that I desire? Going back to the health aspect of things, if you start to get uncomfortable about how healthy your body is, it could be something that's pointing you towards being more healthy. And if you don't want to be more healthy, you just want to be comfortable, you will abandon the healthy habit. But if it's something that you're exercising and your workout routine is really difficult and you're feeling uncomfortable, that doesn't mean abandon it. That could be that your desire needs to focus on what the outcomes are more than your discomfort. So if you're going to improve physically, there's going to be discomfort. And generally, as a people, we accept that because we think there's a greater goal involved. We accept that discomfort knowing something better is coming. So when we have a doubt and a discomfort, we shouldn't just abandon. We need to analyze and figure out which way that's going to point us. Are our desires pointing us to more truth or less truth? Are they pointing us towards, I guess the question is, what do you desire? Where, ask yourself that question. Are my desires taking me away from what I want ultimately to what's going to benefit me in right now? Or you kind of have to analyze that for yourself and figure out where it's going. For me, when I have a doubt, the question is, am I desiring to draw closer to God or not? Is my doubt because drawing closer to God is going to require more changes of me and things that I'm uncomfortable with? That can't be, for me personally, this is me speaking personally, that can't be a reason for me to then follow that doubt where it leads, because that will take me away from God. If my goal is, if my desire is to be with God, then I'm going to have to accept some uncomfortable truths, mostly about myself, because drawing closer to God means a change in me so I can get closer to God.
Yeah, I like to think, as you were talking, I was just thinking about truths being similar to maybe some mountain peaks, where if I say, I want to know the truth, I want truth, it actually requires that we pursue it. And we have to go start walking the path, seeking it, going after it. And we can't find God by exploring the peaks that he's not on. And so you won't find God in all the arguments for why God doesn't exist. And like you say with math, you don't throw out what you know just because you reach a place that doesn't make sense. You really start to go through and evaluate maybe what you need to know or understand to move on to the next thing. But this is something that's interesting to me is people, when they start to doubt, they look to other sources besides the source that could give them the answers. If you have doubts about the Catholic Church and you want to know if it's true or not, you need to study Catholicism and its actual teachings. That's just the only place you're going to potentially find that truth if you're looking for that. And again, the search for truth then becomes a very interesting thing of it being something that's based on not an experience, not knowledge, not facts. Because even facts, many facts are still, they transcend just someone's experience. A fact is often a comparison to something else still. So if I say it's cold in here, well, if I'm in Florida or if I'm in Alaska, it's probably talking about two very different temperatures. Now, if I say it's 37 degrees Fahrenheit in here, I'm getting a lot closer to something that's not as, that doesn't vary as much in meaning. 37 degrees Fahrenheit has a fairly, widely accepted, very stringent definition of what that means. But many of our facts that we throw out and throw around are subject to interpretation. They're subject to language. They're subject to comparisons, and they're understood situationally, which leads some people to say, well, truth is just relative. It just depends on who you are and what you are. But in those scenarios, I look at it and say, but if you're going to accept that belief and that's what you're going to believe, what are your underlying desires? And I think that one of the things that turns people away from God, to your point, Michael, is that a genuine search for God means that there will be changes that come into our lives. The thing about relative truth, the appeal to it, if that's what you're seeking, your desire is that you don't have to change. You're fine as you are. You have your truth and life's going to work out for you. It's a path of least resistance. It's the easy way. And these are things that we find ourselves often wanting in the battle between life and death. The easy way, just tell me how to do it. When I ran for public office, many people just wanted me to tell them what to do, tell them how to vote, give them the solutions, solve their problems. It's a very appealing thing in our world to just give our problems to someone else and let them solve them. Or to say, I don't have to change, I don't have to do anything, because that does take work of us. And so this is something that, again, when we start to have doubts come into our lives, we can recognize, is something changing inside me? Do I have a new desire that's growing? Have I been working really hard for years and I just want to break? I don't want to keep doing this. So I start to look for truths that suggests that maybe I'm just working too hard. Maybe I believe too much. Maybe it's not that hard. But when we do that, we turn from the mountain we're climbing, we look at that peak and go, oh, that one's too hard. I'm going to go find a God that doesn't demand as much of me. Or I'm going to go just stop believing in God and I'll just trust that everything will be okay. But in these situations, we're losing the desire for eternal life. We're losing the desire for the next life. We're losing the desire to prepare. And we are just seeking the desires of today, which by and large becomes entertainment, fun, relaxation, different things that can come along. And so to me, doubts are a natural thing because our beliefs are always changing. But we always have to be asking ourselves, did they change for the better this time? And we need to be very aware of that. And then we have to first look at our desires. Second, we have to pick where we're headed. And some people just will openly say, I've had someone tell me directly, she said, I don't want to believe in God. And to me, say, okay, well, you're honest about that. You recognize it's related to a desire you have that you don't want to believe in God. And again, why is that? Because it required change. All truth to find truth requires that we change something about ourselves. If we really want to reach that mountain peak of that truth and the next truth and the next truth, we have to change things about ourselves. We'll find out we were wrong along the way. And that's a scary proposition because sometimes we base our identity on it. Sometimes our pride, our reputation is based on being right. And so we'll reject truth no matter how many facts are put in our face. And a doubt isn't necessarily produced by a conflicting fact. We have conflicting facts thrown at us all the time based on our beliefs. And yet we just ignore them. They don't cause doubts to arise within us unless that conflicting fact is tied to something that we are struggling with believing or desiring ourselves. Then it can start to produce doubts. But yeah, so in this process, we then turn to the source of those truths. And next, I would suggest we turn to God Himself. That we have to review the truths that are there. Again, they will reference themselves. All truth references itself. Maybe I shouldn't say all. Truth references itself. That's the way that, again, it works. If you want to know me, you got to talk about me. Come to see me. If you want to know if the Bible's true, we have to read it. If you want to know if the Quran's true, you have to read it. You have to go through these things and try. And so part of the way that we can start to look at and say, is this something I want in my life or not? We can look at its fruits. We can look at what it does for people. And there are those who say, yeah, I'm just playing it safe. I accepted Jesus just so I can be saved, just in case. I say, well, I think your desire shows you what truth you're seeking there. You're seeking to be saved, and so you've chosen the path of least resistance for that. You found someone that taught that you just have to accept Jesus, and so you said those words, and now you think that you're good to go. Why don't all the other things produce doubts in you? Well, because you don't really have that much desire related to truth or God. But those are to me some of the pieces that we have to recognize. If I want truth, especially about anything religious or spiritual in nature, I need to go to God directly. Michael, curious what your thoughts are on those things.
Yeah, the nature of truth is an interesting thing. You talked about how we have seemed to have the belief, and it's a belief that materialistically speaking, we can prove things to be true. The materialistic view is that we can do experiments, we can do whatever it takes, and we can prove that things are true, and that then you should just understand that they're true because they've been proven. But it's bypassing the nature of knowing, understanding, and the nature of truth. At the very first place, materialistic proof is only as good as the individuals doing the work, as the instruments they're using. We start to get into things like you mentioned DNA and how do you know if it's you, and you can map your DNA. How can you tangibly touch your DNA or see your DNA? We use instruments to do that. We place our trust in processes and instruments that it's showing us what is real, we like to say. And so it's easy to start doubting because there's so many things in life in the materialistic viewpoint that just aren't materialistic, but we rely on them heavily for our materialistic viewpoints. When we use proofs, we use mathematical equations. Math was a concept, a process invented by human beings. If human beings are just a product of a random process of evolution, why should we believe that mathematics is accurate and will tell us everything we need to know about the universe? I don't see any reason to believe that. And it's all these beliefs we have, always, all these materialistic proofs, viewpoints always come back to a belief. And so truth isn't a simple matter of, let me show you a mathematical proof. Let me show you the way the ball flies through the air, and that's going to prove to you that this is how it goes. It works to a certain degree, but it doesn't get down into our hearts, our beliefs. When the rubber meets the road, what is it we actually believe? We can see things happening and we say, yeah, it appears to happen that way, but we know appearances can be deceiving. We know that we only understand things based on our perception of them. And so, to your point of we have to seek after God, if we want to know truth, that stems from a belief that there is truth. If we don't believe there's an absolute truth, we won't seek it. Problem over. But if there's no absolute truth, it's kind of hard to make the statement that there's no absolute truth. That's logically unacceptable. So then we'd have to throw logic out of the window. Well, logic isn't true either because we can't make a logical statement that there is no absolute truth because that's an absolute statement. So we follow this belief. Well, I believe there's absolute truth. I believe that we have a way of discussing it logically. But that comes from something inside of us. And so as we pursue truth, we ourselves have to pursue it. It can't be given to us by somebody else. And if God is a source of truth, or the source of truth, then we would have to seek out God to gain more and more truth and understand more about truth. That would be the only way, and it would be a relationship between us and God. If we go through other means, then we've started to place our beliefs through something else that isn't quite God. So there's an important relationship there when you say we have to seek out God between us and God that we have to develop in order to seek and understand truth. If we haven't created that relationship between ourselves, us and God, finding truth becomes impossible at that point. We're placing our trust, our belief. I'm not saying don't place any trust or belief. I'm saying more of our trust and belief is placed in other people and other processes than it is placed in God. And so as we seek to know more truth, we have to seek to get closer to God, being the source of truth. And that has to be a relationship between God and us. Anything outside of that is just always going to come back to the question of how do you know? How do you trust that thing? How do you believe that person? With our inability to use material proofs without some sort of underlying belief in something, it always comes back to our personal relationship with God.
Yeah, and then that circles back to, again, we've said it quite a few times, but what do we want? And I remember the last few years I've prayed saying, hey, God, what do you want me to do? Tell me what I should do with my life. And the answer that comes back repeatedly is, what do you want? And it's been quite interesting to me to have God ask me that question over and over again. What do you want, Austin? He's saying, you're asking me to tell you what to do with your life. What do you want? What are you seeking? And this is something that I believe very strongly in. The things we choose to seek will determine the truths we find or don't find. Will determine the mountains we climb, the paths we pursue, because it's our desire, it's our thing. Truth isn't going to be just handed to us. Some of it is, we exist, for example, and but I'm told there's 8 billion people on this earth. Do I know for sure? Do I have firsthand experience? No. I'm trusting in someone. And trust is such a fundamental element of everything we do that here's an interesting question to ponder or consider. If you have doubts and you are believing a person more than you believe what God has said, why is a person any more trustworthy to you than God or something you felt inside? People have shown repeatedly that they do things for ulterior motives or nefarious reasons. And who do we want to believe more in, a person or God? Do we believe in a God that loves us? Do we believe in one that's powerful enough to create us? And if so, the reason I choose to believe is because that's an amazingly powerful thing to think that there's something that can create worlds that I could become like. And I have a desire both to come to know and understand God, but also to become like God. That's something I want. And when I want that, it informs so much of what I do. And I go through and look and say, where can I find truths related to this? Where can I find things that teach me how I can become like God? And those are pieces that are very powerful. And then in my religion, we have the Book of Mormon. And this book has a promise at the end. And it says basically to ask God to say, hey, is this true or not? And let God testify to you whether it is or not. But as is set forth in the Book of Mormon, you have to have real intent. You have to have a humble spirit. Because God's going to ask you to walk on that mountain, to pursue that path to show that you really want something. He's not going to give us something that causes worse health or whatnot if we desire something else. But if we just desire the tastiest, easiest thing that day, that's what we'll get. And we'll throw our health out the window. At some point, we may start to doubt that that food is good for our health. But at that point, we've probably formed a desire to say, I actually want to be a little healthy. And that then makes us start to doubt our approach before to food. And so, to me, what the takeaway from this discussion is to recognize that when you have doubts, don't just assume it's because you had a fact, put in quotes, a fact presented to you. There's so many facts. There's things that appear to conflict. There's all kinds of issues. But at the end of the day, you're going to believe whatever it is that you choose to believe or that you seek after. And we do this as a world consistently. And we can stop playing the games of, if I just show them this fact, it will, change them this way or that way. We can recognize that we need to be discussing and working on our beliefs and attitudes towards the truth. And if we want to know the truth, are we willing to change to know it? It's one of the surest signs you want the truth is if you're willing to change and pursue it. Michael, any final thoughts as we wrap up?
I think you summed that up pretty well, that what we believe really is based on what we desire, that if we want to, I think you can see that through lots of the conflicts we have today. I've heard individuals talking about certain subjects that they thought were absolutely clear, and they met somebody who believed something entirely opposite to that, and they just couldn't see how that person could believe something different than them. And there was comments about their intellectual abilities and how smart they were, but it all comes down to what these different people desire to see in the world. And lots of our frustrations come when our desires aren't aligned with what is true. So we will find what we seek, but it won't necessarily make us happy because we may desire something that doesn't line up with a thing that leads to happiness. The easiest example is always back to health. We may seek and find truth in unhealthy practices, and we may follow those and end up with all kinds of health issues and be angry and frustrated because what we believe didn't match up with what reality was, what the truth is. And so many times our desires take us down paths and make us upset because we desired a thing and then we desired something in absolute conflict with it at the same time, and we couldn't have both. And so we need to make sure our desires line up with seeking truth and following that no matter what the consequences are.
Yeah. And it's certainly an interesting place to be in a heart, to say, I'm willing to change whatever I need to get on this mountain, to pursue this truth, to have an experience with it. And so our invitation to you is, as you think about your doubts, dive into what you believe and what you want. How are they influencing where you're at? And are your wants going to lead you to a place that's good? It's one of the questions to ask yourself. If I pursue this in life, does it leave me any fruits? Does it leave me anything worthwhile if I pursue this path? And if there's nothing worthwhile and nothing you want on that path, don't pursue it. But if you can find something worthwhile or recognize that there's value to what God brings, then those things can be pursued if we have that value there. And so these are pieces that to me, recognizing that our truths, the things we experience or believe, when I say our truths, the things, that means the things that we accept or follow as true, those will come and go based on where our heart is, where our treasure is. And we have to put our treasure upon the things of God to find God. We have to put our treasure upon truth to find truth. And both those things will change us along the way. So we have to be prepared for the ride. But we certainly appreciate you joining us today and being with us. And we hope that you'll take some time to consider some of these things, to consider some of the things you doubt or have questions about, and really try and match it to your beliefs, your desires, and also the things you don't doubt. Maybe others doubt it. Why don't you? What are your beliefs and desires saying? And start to document that, and also help your children or others close to you see that as well, because it will ultimately help you decipher what's going on inside and where you need to look to get and find the truth to answers about the questions you seek. And just a final quick note on that. I don't believe it's bad to have questions at all. In math, if you're studying math, you'll have plenty of questions, but don't throw it all out just because you have a question. Seek to find this resolution. And especially if it's something that God's told you there's a way. It's one reason I brought up the Book of Mormon, is because you can ask God directly. We can all ask God directly. We're his children. And that's an incredible gift we have in our search for truth, to be able to just go and directly ask God. And so we hope you utilize some of these, pursue some of these, and come to better understand your heart. And we will plan on talking with you more next week. Thanks so much for joining.